George Washington didn't know about dinosaurs. Hitler never set foot on Auschwitz. What other real historical facts sound too bizarre to be true? Michael Jackson had a beating scheduled in the World Trade Center on 9/11 but overslept. Seth MacFarlane was meant to be on one of those planes but he also overslept. During early colonial times when the United States wanted to declare independence, George Washington actually had many opportunities to become a dictator. Some even offered him complete and total power, but he declined to respect the newly created branches of power and to pave the way for future generations. Many people really underestimate him. At one cafe in 1913 Vienna, Hitler, Trotsky, Tito and Freud were all regular customers. It's like the pilot episode for the 20th century. So no one told you life was gonna be this way. Lady Diana Spencer was required to undergo a medical exam to confirm her virginity before marrying Prince Charles in 1981. Grace Kelly told Prince Rainier that she was a virgin, but she lost her hymen horseback riding. Franklin Delano Roosevelt managed to keep the fact that he was confined to a wheelchair due to polio a secret from the American public during his presidency. It was virtually a state secret. And the press know it. They agreed to keep it a secret because they did not want to lower the morale of people in wartime. Theodore Roosevelt was the first president of the United States to set foot in another country while in office. This was in 1906. I understand times were different back then. But it baffles me that no other before him didn't even went to a neighboring country at least. Cleopatra's existence is closer to our time than it was to the building of the pyramids. She died about 2,600 years after they were built, but that's only about 2,000 years ago for us. But we tend to think of ancient Egyptian history as all having happened in a similar time period rather than being thousands of years worth of history itself. Yeah, I like the fact that the pyramids were older when the Colosseum was built than the Colosseum is now. More Civil War soldiers died from diseases related to diarrhea than battle wounds. Andrew Jackson, US president, was targeted by an assassin whose gun didn't go off, and proceeded to beat the living snot out of him. The Secret Service actually had to pull him off of his own assassin. The Secret Service doesn't protect the president from you, they are here to protect you from the president. Shakespeare didn't have any birth or death records. He also disappeared for 7 years after his daughter, I think, was born. The conspiracy theory side of me thinks he never existed at this point. Christopher Columbus never stepped foot in America. He just went to some islands in the Caribbean and parts of South America. US money was worthless, so they traded vodka to PepsiCo in exchange for Pepsi in the 1970s. Then in the 1980s they wanted more Pepsi, so they gave PepsiCo submarines, a destroyer and some other stuff, which made PepsiCo the 6th largest military in the world. Briefly. President John Tyler, born in 1790, was the only president to defect to the Confederacy, being elected to their House of Representatives in 1861, but dying in 1862 before he could take office. That's not the bizarre fact though. The bizarre fact is that he still has living grandchildren. The first conscript in World War II was the son of the first conscript in World War I. Alden C. Flagg Jr. of Boston held the first number drawn in the US peacetime draft lottery of 1940. His father, Alden C. Flagg, had drawn the first number in the draft of 1917. The first person to die in the construction of the Hoover Dam was J.G. Tierney, a surveyor who drowned in the Colorado River on the 20th of December, 1922. 13 years later, to the day, his son Patrick became the last man to die when he fell from one of the intake towers. When Albert Einstein went to the United States, he wrote a card to Roosevelt promoting the start of an atomic program in 1939, fearing that the Nazis could start their own atomic program, Uran Varine. Until her death in 2006, there was a Galapagos tortoise named Harriet that had been owned by both Steve Irwin and Charles Darwin. That the Black Death killed between 30 and 50% of Europe's population within 4 years. Hard to imagine how terrifying that must have been. To further blow your mind, The Spanish flu killed even more people than the Black Death did, and it only happened about 100 years ago, 1918 to 1920, yet it's barely remembered today. Sabote, who was one of Genghis Khan's generals, directed more than 20 military campaigns, conquered 32 nations and won 65 battles and conquered more territory than any other commander in history. The discovery of the planet of Uranus, 1781, predates the discovery of Antarctica, 1821. The Romans had flush toilets, and after the fall of their empire that technology fell into disuse for 1,000 years. The first flush toilets were actually first used by the Minoans on Crete, 2,800 years ago. That more people have seen the Mona Lisa than existed in the world when Leonardo da Vinci painted it. I wonder if that would have blown Da Vinci's mind if you could have told him at the time. One of the first emperors of China wanted to become immortal. He had China's best alchemists work on an elixir for immortality, but in the process they ended up inventing gunpowder. This is somewhat well known at this point, but the fact that a single man's decision to disobey orders during the Cold War saved the entire world from nuclear Armageddon always blows my mind. Stanislav Petrov received an alarm that the US had launched a nuclear missile, but decided not to follow through on launching missiles on the US and NATO allies back, as he judged that it was likely a false alarm. When Cortez was conquistadoring around South America, his horse injured its ankle when leaving an Itza city. He left the horse with the Itza. They began to worship the horse as a god. Not knowing what to feed it, they decided to feed it things that they associated with the gods, primarily colorful birds and flowers, so of course the horse starved to death. Fearing the gods would punish them for killing the godly horse, they decided to build a statue of the horse in the middle of the city as an apology. Caesar's Battle of Alesia, where he built two 10-mile-long walls, one around a fortified settlement he was besieging and the other around the first one so he could keep enemy reinforcements at bay. When Microsoft was founded, Spain was still a fascist dictatorship. Nintendo was founded in 1889. Tyre, a small city in Lebanon with nice ancient ruins, used to be an island. But then Alexander the Great builds a bridge connecting it to the mainland, blocking water flow around it, and 2,000 years of sediment later it's no longer an island. In March 1951, when the first Dennis the Menace strip was published in the US, another strip called Dennis the Menace starring a kid in a striped shirt with a dog was published in the UK. It's well established that neither plagiarized the other. It's a hell of a coincidence, but it appears to be. Egyptians lost a war to the Persians because they love cats. Apparently, the Persians knew of the Egyptians' reverence to cats and used them as shields. About 50,000 Egyptians were killed and only 7,000 Persians died, so it seems to have been pretty effective method. It must have been a funny sight. Persians storming into battle with swords, shields, and cats? In 1912, workers were digging a new tunnel for New York's subway, which had just opened about 5 years earlier. During their digging, they punched through to an already completed subway station from 40 years earlier that they had no idea was there, complete with a train car and a grand piano. Back in 1870, there was an attempt to create a pneumatic subway. One station was completed and opened, with a little bit of track to demonstrate the concept. Funding dried up, and the station was sealed up and forgotten, until the workers unexpectedly found it. The British Empire, despite the island's size, at its peak covered almost a quarter of the Earth's landmass. The British Empire also ruled nearly a quarter of the world population, controlled some 60% of the world's wealth, was responsible for 30% of the world's industrial output. In 1870, was actually divided into first and second empires, and sometimes a post-war third. The dividing point being the loss of the American colonies started in 1496 under King Henry VII with the settlement of Newfoundland. Is sometimes held to have lasted until 1997, when Hong Kong was returned to China, and sometimes held to be ongoing depending on your interpretation of the 14 extraterritorial commonwealths under its jurisdiction. If you're over 45, the world population has doubled in your lifetime.